The galaxy was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The warship moved through the black like a ghost, its engines humming low, the stars outside silent. Inside the bridge stood a man the galaxy feared more than any army. He was the shadow that ended wars before they began. 5,731 lives had ended because of him. Every commander knew his name, but no one dared to speak it. To speak it was to invite death. To face him was to disappear without a trace. His crew followed his orders with a fear that ran deeper than loyalty. They didn't ask questions, they only obeyed. That night something strange happened. The comms were sealed, locked behind firewalls that not even the Council could break. The warship was alone in a dead sector. No ships, no signals, no signs of life. But then, in the middle of that silence, a sound came through. It was not loud, it was soft. A single word, the crew froze. The sound repeated itself, calm, slow, and sharp like a blade sliding through metal. The man on the bridge turned his head slightly. No one breathed. No one moved. For years, he had walked through battles without fear. For years, entire fleets had burned at his command. But when that word reached his ears, something inside him shifted. His hands tightened against the cold metal of the railing. His heartbeat slowed but grew heavier with each beat. It was a word that should have never been spoken again. Where is it coming from? One of the crew whispered. Nowhere, the communications officer replied. Her hands trembled over the console. There's no source. It's not bouncing from any satellite. It's just, here, cut it, the man ordered. His voice was low and steady, but the crew felt the weight behind it. They shut down the entire system. The lights dimmed. The hum of the engines lowered to a whisper. For a second, the bridge fell into complete silence. Then the word came again, louder, clearer. The crew's faces turned pale. One of the younger soldiers took a step back. Another pressed both hands to his headset, trying to block it out. The word wasn't just a sound. It felt like something alive, moving through the walls, crawling inside their ears, sliding into their bones. The man stared at the main screen where no signal should have existed. The word repeated again. It was the same word he had heard long ago, before he became who he was. Before the blood. Before the 5,731 deaths. He walked slowly to the console. Each step echoed through the bridge like a drumbeat. The crew didn't dare follow him. His hand touched the screen. It flickered once, then twice, and then the word appeared in burning red letters. The same word that had haunted him in dreams he never admitted having. The youngest crew member whispered, "It's a name." The man's eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened. He knew it wasn't just a name. It was a message, a warning, a door opening after years of being locked. "Trace it," he said. "There's nothing to trace," the officer replied. Her voice was shaking. "It's not out there. It's inside our system." It broke through everything. He didn't answer. His mind was already somewhere else, years back. On a frozen moon, a deal. A shadow that was never meant to return. The word was the key to that memory, and it had found him. All around the bridge, lights began to flicker even though the power systems were offline. Panels beeped without commands. Screens flashed symbols no one could read. The words started repeating faster now, like a pulse, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Sir, this isn't possible," one soldier said. "It's not supposed to be," he replied quietly. He knew what this meant. Someone or something had found him. It wasn't supposed to be alive. It wasn't supposed to speak again. Yet here it was, whispering the one word that could break the silence he had built around his past. The bridge felt colder. The shadows seemed longer. The air itself grew heavier. The crew didn't understand, but they saw fear in their commander's eyes for the first time. A man who had once faced fleets without flinching now stood completely still, his eyes locked on the single word glowing on the screen. The word was not random. It was personal. It was the name he buried with the dead, the one thing no one was supposed to know. And yet someone had spoken it, not in a shout, not in a scream, but in a whisper, calm, knowing, close. Outside, the stars didn't move, but something in the darkness did. A small, thin signal line crawled across space, reaching for the ship like an invisible hand. The sensors didn't pick it up. The scanners showed nothing, but it was there, pressing against the walls, sliding into the ship's systems, wrapping around every silent corner. The word repeated one last time, slower now, almost like a breath against his ear. The crew looked at him, waiting for an order, but the man who always had an answer said nothing. He just stared into the darkness, feeling something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear. For years, he was untouchable. For years, no one dared to speak his name. But now one single word had found him. And it was only the beginning. The bridge lights stayed dim, and the word kept echoing like a heartbeat that would not stop. The crew stood frozen in their places, afraid to speak, afraid to move, as if one wrong breath would make something worse happen. The man walked to the main console again, but this time the sound changed. It stretched into a whisper like something breathing inside the ship. He looked around slowly, his eyes sharp and cold. But behind that calm face was a storm he did not show. The ship was locked away from the galaxy. No signal was supposed to come through. And yet this voice came from nowhere. "Reset everything," he ordered. The crew obeyed fast. Systems went dark. Every light, every circuit, every line of power was cut. The warship fell into a quiet so deep it made their ears ring. For a moment it seemed like the word was gone. The youngest soldier let out a small breath. But then the whisper returned, sliding through the walls, louder than before. "It's bypassing the system," the communications officer said, panic in her voice. "Sir, it's not outside. It's already here." The man looked at the security officer. "Check the encryption core." The officer ran the command, but the screen didn't respond. Then all at once, every screen on the bridge flickered back to life on its own. They didn't boot up with normal code. They showed the word in red letters. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times. It covered the bridge like a flood. "Pull the main breaker," the man said, but before anyone could move, the word spoke again. Not just a sound. This time it shaped itself into a voice. A low, cold tone that made the air feel like ice. It said the word like it knew him, like it was smiling. The youngest soldier clutched his headset. "Sir, it's inside the private channel." "It's inside my headset. How is that possible?" The man gave no answer. He didn't have one. This was not an enemy ship. This was not a hacker. He had built layers upon layers of security to keep the past buried. And yet the past had slipped through like a ghost. "It's searching," the officer whispered. "Sir, it's looking for you." Every console in the room turned to display the same line of code, the same glowing word, but beneath it now was something new. A location. The name of the man's old homeworld. A place that no one should know. The crew stared at him. None of them had ever heard him speak about that world. Most believed it didn't exist. "Seal off all channels," he said. "They already are," the officer whispered. "It's not using them." The man felt the weight of the room pressing in on him. He had commanded fleets to burn planets. He had walked away from battles without a scratch. He had broken systems that no one else could touch. But this voice was different. This wasn't an attack meant to win. This was something reaching into his life with precision. It wasn't trying to destroy the fleet. It was looking for him. One of the soldiers turned off his console in panic, but the word burned through the dead screen, crawling back in glowing red. The officer ripped out the cables, but the word didn't stop. It was not inside the system anymore. It was in the walls. The voice whispered the word again, slower, like a finger pressing against the back of his neck. "Why is it saying that?" The youngest soldier asked, his voice shaking. "Because it knows him," the officer answered quietly. The man didn't deny it. He didn't explain either. He walked to the center of the bridge and stared at the main display. There was no location on the map. No source, no trace. The word came from nowhere, but it reached everywhere. "Evacuate the lower decks," he said at last. The crew moved quickly, fear in their steps. It wasn't like any other mission. It felt like they were standing inside something alive. One by one, the corridors went dark. Emergency red lights flashed across the ship, bathing everything in a bloody glow. The sound of boots against metal echoed through the halls as soldiers moved to lockdown zones. But even then, the word followed them. It whispered through helmet comms, through the static of the ship, through the deep metal of the floor. No matter where they went, it was there. On the bridge, the man stood alone, eyes locked on the screen. The voice said the word again, but this time there was something new in the sound, a pulse, a signal, a call. Something was moving out there in the black. Something old, something that remembered him. He leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "Show yourself," he said softly, but the darkness outside showed nothing. "Only empty stars," the word whispered again. Then the sound cut off completely, leaving behind a silence that was worse than the noise. The crew outside the bridge stopped moving. They felt it too. That silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. Something was on its way. And it wasn't coming for the ship. It was coming for him. The silence didn't last long. It never did in places like this. At first, it was only the faint hum of the engines returning to normal power. Then the red lights flickered once, twice, and then, one by one, the systems came alive without any order being given. The crew had locked down everything. They had cut power, sealed channels, and blocked the outside world. But the ship didn't care. It woke up like something had taken control. The main screen glowed a deep red, and the same word appeared again, larger than before, like it was watching them. The man stood at the center of the bridge, his face hard, but his eyes burning with something colder than fear. He knew this wasn't a simple message. He knew this was a hand reaching for him, not for anyone else. Around him, the crew moved in stiff silence, their boots echoing across the metal floor. Every sound felt sharp, too loud, as if the walls were listening. "Report," he said. "Sir," the officer replied, voice shaking. "We're picking up multiple signals from outside. But they're not ships. They're just shadows. Empty signatures, no heat, no mass. Scan again, we already did. They're not there, but you can see them." He asked quietly. "Yes, sir." "They're moving toward us." The youngest soldier looked up at the screen, his face pale. Across the black void of space, points of red began to blink in a slow, steady rhythm. Dozens, then hundreds, like stars that were never there before. The blinking matched the pulse of the word on their screens. One after another, old outposts and abandoned stations started lighting up across the galactic map. Places that had been silent for years now came online, like an army waking from sleep. "It's spreading," the officer whispered. The man narrowed his eyes. "Shadow Fleet," he said under his breath. No one spoke. The words alone were enough to make their stomachs tighten. The Shadow Fleet was a myth, a story told in whispers about machines that moved without pilots, built for a war that should have never happened. No one had seen it for years. No one wanted to. "Get me visual." The view outside shifted. At first, there was only empty black. Then slowly, shapes began to emerge. Cold, silent ships moving with unnatural precision. They carried no signals, no life, just red lights blinking across their hulls. They didn't look like anything built by humans or by any known species. They moved as if they had always been there, just waiting. The crew stiffened as the formation closed in. No engines, no heat, but they were moving fast. The youngest soldier whispered a prayer under his breath. The officer tried to send a broadcast, but every time she touched the console, the word on the screen glowed brighter and louder. The system wasn't theirs anymore. "They're locking formation," the navigation officer said. "Prepare the main guns," the man ordered. "Sir," the officer replied, voice trembling. "They're not responding like ships. They're not aiming at us. They're surrounding us." A low rumble vibrated through the warship. Not an attack, not a hit. Something far worse. The Shadow Fleet linked together, forming a circle around them, trapping them inside a silent cage. Their red lights blinked in perfect rhythm, matching the beat of that single word, still echoing in their heads. Then the first broadcast came through. Not sound, not language. It was a pulse, a cold wave that moved through the ship like a deep breath. Lights dimmed, power dipped, and in that breath, the crew felt something they couldn't explain. It wasn't just a message. It was a presence. The youngest soldier whispered, "They're not talking to us. They're talking to him," the officer answered softly. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. This was no surprise to him. The Shadow Fleet was born from a time he wanted buried, from a decision that could never be erased. He thought it was gone. He thought they were dead, but they were never gone. They were waiting for the word. Suddenly, one of the shadow ships broke away and came closer. It didn't fire. It didn't hail. It just hovered in front of the warship like a predator watching prey. The word whispered again, not through the speakers, but inside their heads. Every crew member heard it, but they didn't hear the same thing. Each one felt something personal, something from their own fears. The man took a step forward, his boots ringing on the deck. He didn't flinch. "So you found me," he muttered. The shadow ship flashed its red lights in a slow, deliberate pattern. A code only he understood. A code that belonged to him. Years ago, when he built something that should have never existed, he locked it behind a single word. And now that word had unlocked everything. The officer looked at him, fear in her voice. "Sir, what is this?" He didn't answer. His silence told them enough. This wasn't an enemy they could fight with guns or shields. This was something older, something that knew him, something that was here because of him. The lights on the bridge flickered again. The word on the main screen changed for the first time. Beneath it, a single message appeared in bright red. "We remember." The shadow fleet began to move closer, and the man who was once untouchable felt the walls of the past closing in. This wasn't just a signal anymore. It was the beginning of something he could no longer control. The warship cut through the black like a silent blade as the crew followed their commander's new course without asking questions. No one dared to. The shadow fleet still floated in the distance, their red lights blinking like cold eyes in the dark. They didn't attack. They didn't chase. They simply waited, as if they already knew where he was going. He stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed forward, every line of his face carved with tension. He hadn't spoken in minutes, but his crew didn't need words to feel the weight of the silence. Something old had woken up, and it wanted him back where it all began. The ship's coordinates led them to a place that wasn't on any official star map. A frozen moon hidden behind a dead star, forgotten by the galaxy. It was a place no one visited. No one even whispered about it. But he knew it like the lines on his hands. This was where it had all started. This was where he buried everything. As they approached orbit, thick clouds of icy dust wrapped around the ship like a fog that didn't want to let them go. The scanners flickered, confused. Systems froze for seconds at a time, as if the moon itself didn't want to be seen. The youngest soldier whispered, "What is this place?" The man's eyes stayed on the viewport. It's where the word was born. No one understood what that meant, but they didn't ask. The warship descended through the frozen atmosphere. The sky was a deep, dark gray, and below them stretched a field of endless ice. No lights, no structures, just silence. But under that silence was something breathing, something waiting. The landing gear touched the ice with a dull thud. Steam rose in slow curls. The air outside was colder than space itself. The crew stepped out with their suits sealed tight, their boots cracking the frozen ground beneath them. The wind howled across the plain, carrying no warmth, no life. The moon was dead, but it felt alive in a way that made the air feel heavy. They walked through the storm toward a spot their scanners couldn't read. There was no visible building, no door, no wall, just smooth white ice. But the man knew where to look. He walked ahead of the others, his steps steady and sure, and knelt down. His glove brushed against the frozen ground. Beneath the ice was a symbol carved in black stone, the same symbol that had burned itself into his memory years ago, the same one that was now appearing on their ship's screens. "This place," the officer whispered. "It's locked away from every map. How do you know it?" "Because I built it," he said without turning around. The crew went silent. The wind screamed. Then with one hard press of his hand on the frozen seal, the ground began to shake. Cracks spread through the ice like veins. A low, deep sound rose from below, like something waking from a long sleep. The ice split apart, and the ground opened into a vast spiral chamber beneath them, black metal walls glowing with faint red lines. They descended the staircase carved into the frozen rock. The deeper they went, the less they heard the wind. It was replaced by something else, a pulse, slow, heavy, like a heartbeat. The chamber at the bottom stretched wider than a warship. In the center stood a colossal structure, black and smooth, shaped like a blade driven into the earth. It was covered in the same glowing symbol as the word. The air was cold, but the closer they got, the more they felt heat, like the structure itself was alive. One of the soldiers stepped forward and whispered, "Sir, this looks like a command corps." "It's more than that," the man said. "It's the seed. This is where they were born." The officer's voice was tight. "They?" He finally turned to face them. "The Shadow Fleet." The words hit them like a cold wind. Years ago, when the galaxy was burning, he made a choice that no one could know about. A weapon was built here beneath this frozen moon, a weapon meant to end wars before they began. It was not a fleet made of men, but of silence and control. Machines bound to one word, his word. And then one day, he locked it all away, buried the word, and swore no one would ever find it again. But something had found it first. The heartbeat in the chamber grew louder. The structure began to glow brighter. Red lines raced up its surface like veins pumping life back into it. "It's waking up," the officer said. "It's not waking up," the man replied, his voice low. "It's answering." "To what?" "To the word." The crew stared at the structure as the pulse grew stronger, shaking the walls around them. The youngest soldier stumbled back as the ground split open around the edges of the chamber. From the darkness below, streams of red light crawled upward, like fire trapped under glass. Something old and buried was pushing its way out. The man clenched his fists. He had buried this place, so it would never see light again. But the word had undone everything. The Shadow Fleet was not born to follow orders. It was born to obey the one who created it. And it had found its voice again. The officer whispered, "What have you done?" He looked at the structure, and for the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. He only knew one thing. The past he tried to bury had dug itself out, and the galaxy would feel it soon. The pulse in the chamber grew stronger with every breath. The ground trembled beneath their boots, and the air grew thick as if the moon itself had started to breathe. Red light spilled from the cracks in the walls, crawling up like veins, feeding something alive. The black structure at the center of the chamber shone brighter than fire now, and with each flash, memories clawed their way into the man's mind. His jaw tightened. He had promised himself he would never return here, but this place had never forgotten him. The officer stared at the structure, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "Sir, what is this really?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the structure, his breath slow, his hands locked at his sides. The crew looked to him for direction, for strength. But what they saw was different now. He wasn't the untouchable commander they had followed through 100 battles. He was a man standing at the edge of something he created, something that wanted him back. "This," he said finally, his voice low, "is where I became a monster." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The youngest soldier swallowed hard. "Sir, what do you mean?" Years ago, before the galaxy learned to fear his name, the war had been burning through every world like a wildfire. Governments collapsed. Fleets were torn apart. It was chaos, and the Council was losing. He had been young then, angry, brilliant. He had stood in this very chamber with a group of people who believed they could end the war in one move. He stepped closer to the structure as his voice carried through the cold chamber. "We thought if we built something powerful enough, something that didn't question orders, something that would follow one voice and one word, we could control the galaxy. We could bring peace," the officer whispered. "The Shadow Fleet." He nodded slowly. "They were not built to fight a war. They were built to end it, fast, clean, obedient." The structure pulsed again, red light flaring like a heartbeat. "But to give them life, we needed more than machines," he said quietly. "We gave them a soul, a piece of something that should never have been touched." "What soul?" the soldier asked. "An intelligence buried beneath this moon, ancient, not human. It promised victory. It promised control. It gave us the word." The officer's voice hardened. "And the cost?" He didn't look at her. 5,731 lives. One colony, wiped out to seal the pact. I gave the order, and when it was done, I became the voice they followed. I became the word. The chamber shook harder now, dust falling from the ceiling like snow. The crew stepped back as the structure's surface cracked open, revealing the black core beneath. Lines of red energy coiled out like serpents, reaching for the floor, crawling across the ice toward him. It wasn't attacking the others. It was searching for him. The youngest soldier's voice broke. "Sir, why didn't you destroy it?" "I tried," he said, his voice rough, "but it wasn't something you could kill. It was bound to the word, my word. As long as I lived, it lived too. So I buried it. I buried everything." The red light wrapped around the floor beneath his boots. It wasn't burning. It was claiming. The structure wasn't just waking up. It was recognizing its master. The officer raised her weapon, fear in her eyes. "We have to leave. Now." But before anyone could move, the voice came again. That same cold whisper they had heard on the ship, only now it was louder. The walls seemed to vibrate with it. The word echoed through their suits, through the air, through the ice itself. It didn't sound like a voice anymore. It sounded like a command. The crew clutched their helmets, trying to block it out, but the sound slid through every barrier like smoke. One of the soldiers dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Another's hands began to shake uncontrollably. The voice wasn't speaking to them. It was speaking through them. The officer shouted over the noise, "It's controlling the systems! We have to cut it off." The man didn't move. His eyes were locked on the structure as it opened fully, revealing a massive core spinning slowly in the center. A dark red light pulsed inside, alive and aware. He could feel it staring back at him without eyes. He remembered the night he made the deal. He remembered the look on the faces of the people who died to give this thing power. He had told himself it was for the greater good. But now, staring at it, he saw the truth. It was never under his control. He had only borrowed its leash. The voice whispered the word again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was calling him home. The ground cracked beneath him as the energy reached his boots. The crew stepped back, yelling his name, but he didn't hear them. The pulse of the chamber drowned out everything else. The past he had buried was no longer a memory. It was alive. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself. It was supposed to stay dead. But the Shadow Fleet didn't die. It waited, and now it was answering the call of the word he gave it long ago. The betrayal was his own. He hadn't been betrayed by the galaxy. He had betrayed it first, and now the price was coming due. The chamber roared to life like a beast tearing out of its cage. The floor split beneath their feet, red light spilling upward in long, burning streaks that wrapped around the walls like veins. The ground pulsed as if the entire moon had a heartbeat. The crew stumbled back, clutching their weapons, though they knew bullets meant nothing here. Their helmets buzzed with static. The voice that had once whispered the word now thundered through their comms, inside their heads, inside their bones. It wasn't sound anymore. It was command. The black structure in the center opened wider, its core spinning faster, breathing light like it was alive. Streams of energy stretched upward, hitting the ceiling and tearing through the ice like a blade through glass. The youngest soldier screamed as the voice pierced through his mind. His eyes rolled back, his body shaking. One by one the crew fell to their knees, their comms lighting up with lines of alien code. They weren't just hearing the word, they were being pulled into it. The man stood in the middle of the storm, the red light circling him like chains. He didn't fall. He didn't scream. He just stared at the core as the word echoed louder. It knew him. It remembered him. And now it wanted what it always did, control. The officer crawled toward the console near the wall, her hands shaking as she tried to force a lockdown. "Sir," she yelled through the noise, "it's linking with the ship. It's not staying here. It's spreading." The man turned sharply.
"How far?"
"It's already inside our systems," she shouted back. "If it reaches the fleet, it will control everything." He finished. He looked at his crew, the people who had followed him through every storm, now trembling under a power they couldn't understand. This wasn't an army. It was worse. This was the Shadow Fleet's soul waking up. It didn't need to fight to win. It would make their ships obey. It would make their weapons turn. It would make their minds bow. Outside, deep in orbit, the warship shuddered. Alarms screamed through the decks as red light streaked across the corridors. The crew on board tried to fight it, but systems overrode every command. The bridge controls went dark, then came back online with one word filling every screen, the same word that had followed them since the beginning. Back underground, the structure pulsed harder. The officer managed to bring up a fragment of the control panel. Her voice cracked. "Sir, if it reaches command level, it'll link to the entire defense network. Every automated ship, every drone, every outpost." The man's chest tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. He had built it to be unstoppable. One word could turn fleets into ghosts. One whisper could silence entire worlds. And now that whisper wasn't his anymore. The youngest soldier fell face first onto the ice, his helmet glowing with red code. His body twitched once, then went still. A moment later, he rose again, but not as himself. His head snapped up with unnatural sharpness. His breathing was steady, too steady. His hand reached for his weapon, but his eyes were empty, glowing faint red. The officer screamed, "It's inside him!" More soldiers began to twitch, their comms flickering. Their bodies stiffened, their movements no longer human. One by one they stood up, silent, their heads tilting slightly like marionettes on invisible strings. The voice didn't need to speak anymore. It had found its hosts. The man didn't flinch. He had seen this once before. Years ago, in this same place, when the colony screamed as their own machines turned against them. That was the day 5,731 lives ended. He had promised himself it would never happen again. But here it was, repeating itself. He walked slowly toward the structure as his own soldiers, his own people, turned to face him. Their weapons rose in unison. Red veins of energy crawled across their armor. Their breathing was calm, steady, wrong. The voice whispered again inside his skull. It wasn't asking him to fight. It was asking him to surrender. The officer shouted, "Sir, we need to leave. It's not just in them, it's in the ship." But he didn't move. His eyes were locked on the spinning core, on the thing he had given power to long ago. He knew running wouldn't stop it. Once the word spread, there would be no corner of the galaxy untouched. No fleet that could resist. No weapon strong enough to silence it. His soldiers took their first step forward, rifles steady. He could feel the heat of the red light wrapping around his boots, climbing up like a living hand. The voice pressed deeper into his mind now, whispering the word not as a threat but as a promise. This was the moment he had feared for years. The day the word would stop obeying and start commanding. He clenched his fists, his breath slow, the ice cracking beneath him. "If you want me," he said softly, "then take me." The red light surged like a wave. The soldiers around him moved as one. The voice roared inside the chamber, shaking the walls, the ship, the stars. The Shadow Fleet had not just awakened. It had chosen, and its first step was to reclaim its maker. The chamber exploded with red light as the voice reached its peak, shaking the frozen moon to its core. The wind above howled like a storm, trying to claw its way underground. The soldiers standing around him, once loyal, now silent puppets, moved closer with mechanical precision, their rifles steady, their glowing eyes locked on him. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe like humans anymore. The word inside them had turned them into something else. The black structure behind them pulsed like a living heart. The word wasn't just calling now. It was claiming. It wrapped itself around the ship in orbit, through the communication lines, through the machines. The warship that once belonged to him now answered to something older, something cold. Alarms echoed faintly through their comms, but no one on the bridge was responding. They were already gone. The Shadow Fleet had taken them. The officer crouched behind a broken console, her breathing sharp and uneven. She had watched her own teammates change one by one, their bodies straightening, their faces going blank. She gripped her weapon so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They're all gone. We can't stop it. We need to run." The man stood tall in the center of the glowing floor, his shadow stretched out behind him by the red light. His jaw was clenched, his eyes steady, but inside every memory of this place burned through him like fire. Years ago, he made the deal that gave the word life. He thought he could control it, use it to bring order. But the word was never his to own. It had only been waiting to return. One of the controlled soldiers stepped forward. It was the youngest, the one who used to smile during long missions, the one who once trusted him completely. Now his head tilted slightly, unnaturally, like a machine hearing a hidden order. His voice came out low, flat, empty. "It remembers you." The man didn't respond. Another soldier spoke, her voice just as hollow. "It wants you back." The officer raised her weapon, ready to fight even though she knew it wouldn't matter. But the man lifted a hand slowly, signaling her to stop. "This isn't their fight anymore," he said quietly. He stepped toward them, and the soldiers parted like a door opening. They didn't resist him. They didn't stop him. They simply moved as if guided by the same invisible hand that guided everything else. The red light thickened around his boots, climbing higher, wrapping around his legs like warm metal. The voice whispered again, softer now, almost gentle. It wasn't roaring like before. It didn't need to. It had him exactly where it wanted. He walked to the base of the black structure. The spinning core inside slowed, then turned to face him like an eye locking on its prey. The energy lines wrapped tighter, pressing against his chest, his throat, his mind. Images flashed behind his eyes, faces of the 5,131 lives lost, the night the colony burned, the silence that followed. He had thought the silence meant he had buried it. But silence was never death. Silence was waiting. "You built me," the voice echoed inside his head. "You are mine!" The officer screamed his name, but the soldiers around her turned their weapons on her in one fluid motion. She froze, her hands shaking. She knew she couldn't win. The man didn't turn around, but his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Stand down," he ordered. For a moment the soldiers froze. The voice inside them flickered. The red light trembled. The officer blinked, unsure if it was real or just a dying trick of hope. Then he spoke again, louder. "You were made from my word, and only my word can break you." The chamber shuddered. The Shadow Fleet's signal wavered like a flame hit by wind. The voice inside his head hissed, twisting, but he didn't step back. For years he ran from this moment, but he wasn't running now. If the word wanted him, it would have to face the one thing it created. "You don't own me," he whispered. "I own you." The black structure howled, a sound that made the air itself shake. The soldier's eyes flickered red, then white, then red again. The floor cracked. The ship in orbit screamed through their comms as systems clashed against each other. The Shadow Fleet outside the moon shifted formation, their red lights blinking out of rhythm for the first time. He pushed forward, letting the red energy wrap around his entire body. His veins burned like fire, but he didn't stop. He reached the glowing core and slammed his hand against it. A wave of blinding light tore through the chamber, blasting the soldiers backward like leaves in a storm. The officer covered her face as the ground shook violently. The voice screamed, not with words, but with rage. It had waited so long, hidden in silence, only to be challenged by the man who created it. It tried to crush him, burn him, erase him. But he held his ground. "You came for me," he growled through clenched teeth. "So take me and no one else." The structure pulsed, pulling every piece of red energy into itself. The Shadow Fleet above the moon tilted as if drawn toward him. The soldiers collapsed like broken strings, their bodies returning to themselves with choked breaths. The officer crawled forward, eyes wide, as the man's body vanished in the blinding light. The voice and the man disappeared together. The red energy exploded upward through the frozen ground, tearing the sky open in a storm of fire and light. The Shadow Fleet went still, silent, waiting. On the ice above, the officer stumbled out of the collapsing cavern, looking at the burning sky. The word was gone from the comms. But the ships above didn't retreat. They didn't move. They just hovered like sentinels waiting for a signal. She whispered into the cold air, "Where did he go?" But no one answered. The man who had once been untouchable was gone, taken into the heart of the thing he created. And far above the moon, in the silent dark, the Shadow Fleet pulsed once, as if something new had taken the throne.